Yes?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I want to start talking about, this is one chapter in the book. Yeah, and as usual, I'm going to take a whistle stop tour, I believe they're called. Okay, through this chapter, and as usual, you have to spend much more time to try and understand what is going on here. On the other hand, the ideas are quite straightforward, and we are using the same set of ideas over and over again. Okay, so it's clear that if you have a function which is holomorphic and which has two independent periods, whatever I mean by independent, then in that fundamental domain, I have a picture here. Suppose it is periodic in this direction and periodic in that direction. Okay, fz plus n plus m tau. So when you translate it by n, you get f of z, and when you translate it by tau, you get f of z. So this is the meaning of doubly periodic. Okay. So if you have a holomorphic function that is doubly periodic, then you look at what happens on the closure of this one parallelogram. Okay. Then the function is continuous. This parallelogram closure is a compact set. Continuous function on a compact set is bounded. Therefore, the function is bounded on the closure of that parallelogram, and the translates of that parallelogram cover the whole complex plane. Therefore, the function will, if it is entire and bounded, and therefore it is a constant. Okay. So the point is that you can't have holomorphic functions, holomorphic functions that have two independent periods. Therefore, instead of holomorphic functions, we want to look at meromorphic functions. So we want meromorphic functions. Okay. Meromorphic means what? Meromorphic means that in any finite region of the plane, there are finitely many poles. So the set of poles cannot have any limit point. Okay, the poles are isolated. So you want meromorphic functions which are periodic with these two periods. Okay, omega 1 and omega 2, and it's quite easy to understand that if omega 1 is a rational number of, if you have these two periods which are omega 1 and omega 2, that means fz plus omega 1 is equal to fz is equal to fz plus omega 2. Omega 1 and omega 2 are some complex numbers. Okay, then if omega 1 is a real multiple of omega 2, real will mean what? Suppose it's a rational multiple of omega 2, first of all, then you'll get that f is going to be periodic in some, doubly periodic in some bigger region. Okay, and therefore you'll get f is constant. If omega 1 is a real multiple of omega 2, that means it's an irrational multiple of omega 2, not a rational number, then you will get that there's a dense set of points on which the function is the same, and therefore f must be a constant. So the only thing is, only case where you're really worried about this is when omega 1 and omega 2 are linearly independent over real numbers, and therefore you can normalize it so that omega 1 is 1 and omega 2 is some complex number. Imaginary part is not equal to 0. And then therefore, by just considering tau and minus tau, you can assume that imaginary part of tau is greater than 0. So this I'm going to spend a little bit of time later on thinking about. You see, we have the periods are 1 and tau, where the imaginary part of tau is greater than 0. Okay, and I'm going to fix this tau. So the periods are 1 and tau. Okay, later on we are going to worry about what is the dependence on tau. Okay, so as tau changes, what happens? So, but that comes at a bit later stage. That will be towards the end if I reach there today. I may not reach there today. Okay, so what we want, what we are looking for are meromorphic functions, okay, f, which are defined on the complex plane. So you can have poles, okay, and they satisfy this periodicity condition. F of z plus 1 is f of z, and f of z plus tau is f of z, where imaginary part of tau is greater than 0. Okay, so such a thing is called a elliptic function. Clearly, if you know the values of the function in this fundamental domain, which is a plus b tau, that's your parallelogram, and you know that as you translate this parallelogram on the x direction by integers, and in the other direction, tau direction, by multiples of tau, you will cover the entire plane. And therefore, you're interested in this particular lattice, which is n plus m tau, where n, m, and z, and every point in z, okay, the fundamental lattice is z is equal to a plus b tau, 0 less than equal to a less than 1. So what I mean is that the lower thing and the left line is included, but this upper line and the right line is not included. Okay, so every z in C, you can find a unique n and m such that z naught minus m tau minus n minus m tau is in P naught. And therefore, every z can be translated to a point in P naught by a member of the element of the lattice. Okay. Entire doubly periodic function is constant. I've already said this. This is just a consequence of Liouville's theorem. And elliptic function is a meromorphic function, which is not constant and which is meromorphic, non-constant, doubly periodic function. So an elliptic function is a meromorphic, non-constant, doubly periodic function. So we still have to give an example. Okay. Now the total number of poles of an elliptic function in the fundamental domain has to be at least 2. Okay. And this is a consequence, it's a very easy consequence of the residue theorem. Why? Because if you have this meromorphic function f, you integrate that meromorphic function around the boundary of the fundamental domain. Suppose it has no poles on the boundary. But then what you know is that integral from 0 to 1 is equal to the integral from tau to tau plus 1 because the function is periodic. Okay. And however, you're going from tau to tau plus the other direction, 1 plus tau to tau. But integral from 0 to 1 is equal to the integral from tau to 1 plus tau. And therefore, the integral from 0 to 1 plus the integral from 1 plus tau to tau. This is going in the reverse direction. So you have a minus sign. So this plus this is 0. Similarly, integral from 0 to tau is the same as the integral from 1 to 1 plus tau. And therefore, integral from 1 to 1 plus tau is minus the integral from 0 to tau. Therefore, these two things are 0. So therefore, the sum is 0. Okay. But the sum over this region is the sum of the residues. So the sum of the residues is 0 in the fundamental domain, but it has at least one pole. Okay. And therefore, it must have one more pole, at least. Okay. Because the sum of the residues must be 0. If you have only one pole, then how can the sum of one of those things be 0? And of course, if you have a pole on the boundary, then you just shift it so that you don't get a pole on the boundary. Just shift this thing. If you have a pole at one of the points in the boundary, just shift it. Okay, so you will not get a pole on the boundary. So there's no big deal about that. So the number of poles of a doubly periodic function in the fundamental parallelogram is called the order. Okay, so The question is that how do you actually construct these things of different orders? But one corollary for this is that every elliptic function of order m has exactly m zeros. See, it has order m means what? Order m means that it has m number of poles, okay, in the fundamental domain is called the order. Of course, you're counting the number of poles with the multiplicity, okay? So the number of poles is m. And what is this next lemma saying? The next lemma saying is that the number of poles is equal to the number of zeros. Okay. Why? So we know that integral of f prime z over fz dz, f is meromorphic, remember. Therefore, I can calculate, I can do this kind of business, but I know that the integral of f prime over f over a contour is 2 pi I times the number of zeros minus the number of poles. Okay. And this quantity again is going to be periodic with the same periods. Therefore, the integral of the boundary is going to be 0. And therefore, this 2 pi I number of zeros minus number of poles is 0. And therefore, number of poles is equal to number of zeros. If you have anything on the boundary, just shift it. Okay. So if the order of f is m, you take f minus c naught. C naught is any complex number. If f is meromorphic, if f is elliptic of order m, then f minus c naught is also elliptic of order m. And therefore, f minus c naught has m zeros. We are going to need this very soon. So if you take any c naught, remember this is kind of weird, no? If you take any c naught, then there are m points. What is m? M is the order of f. There are m points in P naught, which are zeros of fz minus c naught. Okay. So if the order is m and c naught is any constant, then f minus c naught is an elliptic function of order m, and therefore f minus c naught has m zeros. Okay. Now the point is that we want to construct such an elliptic function. Now, if you want to construct something which is periodic of period 1 and which has integer, which has poles at all integers, so 1 over z plus n is going to have poles at the integer minus n. And therefore, we want to add these things up to get poles at every integer. So we want to look at 1 over z plus n and a sum. But you know that this sum, as it stands, is decaying like 1 by n, and 1 by n is not summable. So when you want to sum that, you have to be careful. Okay. So how will you be careful? You can say that, you sum it up symmetrically. That means you don't, you're summing up in a special way. Namely, you're summing up from minus n to n, and then you're summing up from minus capital N to plus capital N, and then letting capital N tend to infinity. This is called a symmetric sum. Okay, the sum is symmetric around the origin because you're summing from minus capital N to plus capital N. But when you do that, you can write it as you take out the term which corresponds to n equal to 0, and then you have the terms which correspond to n equal to 1 and minus 1, n equal to 2 and minus 2, and you start grouping them together, which I can do because this is a finite sum. And when you have this finite sum, you get that each summand is now decaying like n squared. And therefore, this summand will be summable. That sum will be finite because it's decaying like n squared. Okay. So the point here is that I'm arranging it in a certain way Or I can also say it's the same thing as I'm subtracting 1 by n. So I haven't said that. I should have said that. Okay. This is the same as saying sum 1 over z plus n minus 1 by n. Anyway, so this is the kind of thing you do some particular way of taking the sum. Here it's a symmetric sum, and you get that it is summable. The symmetric sum is convergent. So I want to do the same thing with two independent periods, n plus m tau. So I look at this set, n plus m tau when n and m z, and this is the lattice that is associated to this tau. And the order of the elliptic function, order is the number of poles in P0, is at least 2. Okay, so if you want to do the same thing that we had done earlier, the obvious thing to do is just look at 1 over z plus w, where w is in lambda. That means w is equal to n plus m tau. So I'm looking at 1 over z plus n plus m tau squared. Okay, and it's a good exercise to understand that when you sum up over all n and m, this sum is not summable in the same way that summation of 1 over n is not summable in one dimension. In the same way, 1 over n mod n plus mod m squared is not summable over the plane. This is a good exercise to do. I have not written that down. I should have written it down. Okay. So the exercise is sum over nm not equal to 0, 0. 0, 0, obviously you don't want a 1 over 0. So sum over nm not equal to 0, 0. 1 over mod n plus mod n squared. Okay, this sum is not summable. This sum is infinite, is the exercise you have to do. Okay, so as it stands, this thing is not summable. But you can understand that this is going to be periodic. If it were summable, this is going to be periodic. Because when you translate z by 1, that omega, your w, has an n. So that 1 can be transferred to this n. And when you translate it by tau, you get m plus 1 tau. And therefore, you can absorb that translation in tau in the m. Okay, so if it were summable, then it will be periodic with period 1 and period tau. Okay, but the exercise is that 1 over this is not convergent, just as summation 1 over z plus 1, z plus n is not convergent. Remember, this is an integral in one dimension. This is a summation in one dimension, whereas this is a summation in 2 dimensions. Okay, and therefore you want to modify the definition in the same way that we had. It's not the same way, but it's essentially the same way that we had earlier. So you take the term which corresponds to w equal to 0 out, and then you have 1 over z plus w, and you're going to subtract something, 1 over w squared. Okay, so I look at this thing, and when I look at 1 over z plus w minus 1 over w squared, you get this quantity. Okay, and note that as a function of w, that means a point in the lattice, here in the numerator you have a w, and in the denominator, remember z is fixed. The numerator you have a w, and in the denominator you have a w to the power 4. Therefore, it looks like 1 over w to the power 3. Okay, and then the claim is that this particular series is convergent. Why? So it basically boils down to the same thing as saying that summation 1 over n is divergent, but summation 1 over n to the k is convergent for all k greater than 1. What would you expect the statement to be in 2 dimensions? The statement you would expect to be in 2 dimensions is 1 over, okay, let me repeat myself. In 1 dimension, we have that summation 1 by n. Okay, suppose I'm only talking about positive integers. So in one dimension, summation 1 by n is divergent. But summation 1 by n to the k is convergent for all k greater than 1. What should the corresponding statement be in 2 dimensions? That means you want to sum up over n and m. What should the statement be? Do you understand what I'm trying to make you think about?
Yes, sir.
What should the statement be? So let me repeat myself. My statement is that summation 1 over n is always positive. Summation 1 over n is infinite, but summation 1 over n to the k, let me not call it k, summation 1 over n to the r is finite as soon as r is greater than 1. This is the statement in 1 dimension. What is the corresponding statement in 2 dimensions? So I must have summation 1 over all n and m of 1 over n plus m. Everything is positive. Okay, n and m are positive. To what power is divergent, but to what power is convergent? What should I say?
A similar statement will do.
Yes, what is the statement?
Summation 1 over n plus m raised to r is convergent when r is greater than 1.
So should it be 1 is my question then. What should it be? Now you have 2 dimensions. So what should your statement be? No?
No, sir.
Is it greater than 2?
Do you understand that 1 that you have in 1 dimension is the dimension of that space? So in 2 dimensions, that 1 should be replaced by a 2.
2. Yes.
Okay, so I should say something which says that 1 over n plus m to the power 2, and I assume everything is strictly greater than 0. Okay, 1 over n plus m to the power 2 is divergent.
I'm not getting how we are taking that summation. I mean,
Sum over all
M.
n and m with n greater than 0 and m greater than 0. Okay, you know, I'm going to put a mod afterwards, so that mod doesn't really matter. In the same, I mean, what I want you to see is that there's an analogy between summation 1 over n greater than or equal to 1 is divergent, whereas summation 1 over n to the r n greater than or equal to 1 is convergent for all r greater than 1. Okay, this all of you know. My question is, what is a corresponding thing in 2 dimensions? In 2 dimensions, the statement will be summation
r is greater equal
to
2.
r is greater than or equal to,
And greater than 2.
so do you understand? The statement should be that 1 over n plus m summation n equal to 1 to infinity, summation m equal to 1 to infinity, 1 over n plus m to the power 2 should be divergent. And summation n greater than equal to 1, m greater than equal to 1 over n plus m to the power r should be convergent if r is greater than 2. And exactly the same corresponding statement should be true in 3 dimensions. Yes? What will be the statement in 3 dimensions? 1 over n plus m plus q to the power 3
Is
should be
divergent.
divergent, and 1 over n plus m plus q to the power r should be convergent for all r greater than 3. Okay? So this is the statement that you expect to be true. Okay? As the dimensions go on increasing, these things should go on increasing. So that is the next thing we want to do. That r greater than 2, sum of this is finite, n plus m. See, I'm removing that nm equal to 0, and you have mod n plus mod n to the r. Okay, and suppose r is greater than 2, then you have n plus m. You fix your n first. Fix your n first. Then you sum up over all the m. Okay. So what am I doing here? Why am I putting m not equal to 0? Fix n and put n not equal to 0. Okay. Then you can sum up over all the m's. I don't understand why I'm putting that m not equal to. This is okay. When m is equal to 0, you get n to the r. Therefore, I'm summing up over all m not equal to 0, this to the r. And it's clear that when you replace m by minus m, you get the same sum. So it's twice 1 over n mod n plus mod m to the power r, where m goes from 0 to infinity, from 1 to infinity. So mod m goes from 1 to infinity. So mod n plus m is your k, and your k goes from n plus 1 to infinity. And what is this sum? This 1 over k to the r is less than equal to 1 over x to the r dx, 1 over x to the r on this interval. Which interval? On 1 over k to the r is less than 1 over x to the r when x lies between k minus 1 and k, because that's a decreasing function. Okay, and when x increases, this thing is x to the r is decreasing, and therefore there's some, anyway, you don't have to worry about that too much. And this integral you can evaluate, you see the point here is that you get 1 over n to the r here, but when you integrate this part, you get 1 over n to the r minus 1. Okay, and therefore when you take the sum over all this, you want this to be convergent, and therefore you want r to be greater than 2. Okay, this part is going to be convergent for r greater than 1, but this part is not going to be convergent, where you just put r greater than 1. So you must have r greater than 2. Okay, so the first statement is that this to the power r is finite for r greater than 2. Because you still have to convince yourself that for r equal to 2, it is not finite. So that was for n plus n. What about n plus m tau? Okay, so you take n plus m tau in lambda star, that means both are not equal to 0. And my claim is that this is finite. And this follows from a couple of statements which are obvious, that a squared plus b squared to the 1/2 is less than a plus b, and a is less than a squared plus b squared to the 1/2. B is less than a squared plus b squared to the 1/2. Therefore, a plus b is less than 2, a squared plus b squared to the 1/2. So I'm going to write tau as real part plus imaginary part. Take the absolute value, and when you take the absolute value, you get this, and the absolute value is the square of the real, square of the imaginary, okay, to the 1/2. And I know that a squared plus b squared to the 1/2, where are we? A squared plus b squared to the 1/2 is greater than or equal to half into a plus b. A squared plus b squared to the 1/2 is greater than or equal to half into a plus b. I can drop the t and I have some constant which is uniform because t is going to be something fixed. Okay, t is my tau, remember it's something fixed. Okay, so this I can make that this is greater than or equal to something with m, and then I can drop the s. So here there is something to be done here, that I can drop the s where c and c tilde are some absolute constants, some constants. They will depend on s and t, I don't care. Okay, and therefore 1 over n plus m tau is less than 1 over n plus m to the r, and this is finite, and therefore you get lemma b follows from lemma a. Okay, r is greater than 2. So note for r greater than 2, the series n plus m tau to the r converges uniformly in every half plane. Now we are going to be interested in this kind of sums a bit later on. I don't know if I'll come to that, but I might. Okay. Those sums have a name. Okay. And they're important in their own right. So we'll see. I hope I come to that. I'm not sure if I will a bit later on. So what I know is that that sum, so where am I now? Here. I'm looking at this gz. This term is like 1 over n plus m tau cubed. And 3 is greater than 2. And therefore that quantity is convergent. This gz is convergent. Okay. So all this was just to tell me that that gz is convergent. So the Weierstrass SP function is defined by that 1 over z plus w squared. Then I'm subtracting that 1 over w squared. Okay, so that I get something which looks like each summand is like big O of 1 over w cubed. Okay, and that big O of 1 over w cubed is convergent. If you take any r greater than 0 and suppose mod z is less than r, then this sum I'm going to break up into two terms. One is mod w less than 2r and mod w greater than 2r. Now notice that mod z is less than r. Okay, so if your sum of omega is greater than 2r, then this quantity is convergent, is analytic. There's no problem. You're taking a sum of analytic functions, which sum is summable, and there are no zeros there, and there are no poles there. It is summable. So the second term, okay, the second term is holomorphic, and the first term has zeros of order 2 at each lattice point. Okay, holomorphic first term has double poles at each omega for omega less than or equal to 2r. Okay, so P is a meromorphic function with double poles at the lattice points. This is one thing I wanted. Now the claim is that P is an elliptic function with periods 1 and tau and double poles at the lattice points. So I already know that it has double poles at the lattice points, and this is a very neat trick to tell me that it is actually elliptic. So how do I do that? I know that the series converges uniformly. Okay, so long as imaginary part of tau is greater than delta greater than 0. Tau is fixed. So I can take derivatives, and I can take derivatives term by term. When you take derivatives term by term, you get P prime. So I should also say this. Okay, I have to worry about this periodicity because when I looked at my definition of P and I changed z by z plus 1, this thing does not remain fixed. Okay, I cannot say from this that Pz plus 1 is Pz. Nor can I say that Pz plus tau is Pz. So I have to do something else, okay? Or I have to be slightly more careful. Can actually do that, but anyway, I have to be slightly more careful to show that P has periods 1 and tau. Okay, and this is a nice trick that you take the derivative. The derivative is like this. The derivative of poles of order 3 and it is periodic with period. Now here when I change z to z plus 1, okay, or z to z plus tau, all that is happening is that the n gets shifted by n plus 1 or the m gets shifted by m plus 1 and therefore you get p prime z is periodic. So P prime is convergent. It has triple poles at the lattice points and it is periodic with period 1s and tau. Okay. Therefore, P of z plus 1 minus P z prime is equal to 0. Okay. And therefore, P z plus 1 minus P z is equal to A, some constant. And this is true in some region and therefore it must be true everywhere. Okay. Now, P is an even function, okay, because you can replace W by minus W, okay, and P of half, that means P of half is P of minus half, okay, and therefore when you put Z equal to 1/2, you get A is equal to Z equal to 1/2 minus 1/2. You get P of minus 1/2 and P of half, but this is 0. That means A is constant, and therefore P of Z is P of Z plus 1 is P of Z, and therefore P of Z plus, similarly, you can get P of Z plus tau is P of Z. So this tells you that P is doubly periodic. So P is an elliptic function of order 2 with double poles at each point in that lattice. Okay. Now, P is even and P prime is odd when you replace Z by minus Z. What is P prime here? You replace Z by minus Z, you can put that minus sign in here and here and you pull the minus sign out. So you get P prime is odd. P is even, P prime is odd. P prime of half is equal to minus P prime of minus half. But P prime of minus half is P prime of half because P prime is periodic, and therefore P prime of half is 0. Similarly, P prime of tau by 2, P prime of 1 plus tau by 2 is 0. So P prime is an elliptic function of order 3. These are zeros of P prime in the fundamental domain. Therefore, these are the only zeros of P prime in the fundamental domain. That is what we have shown. Okay, if you have order m, then the number of zeros in each fundamental domain is exactly m. These are 3 zeros of P prime. P prime is an elliptic function of order m, order 3. These are 3 zeros of P prime. Therefore, these are the only 3 zeros of P prime in the fundamental domain. Okay. So half, tau by 2 and 1 plus tau by 2. These are called the, remember the periods are what? The periods are 1 and tau. So 1/2 and tau by 2 are the half periods. And therefore 1 plus tau by 2 is also a half period. Okay. So these are called the half, tau by 2 and 1 plus tau by 2 are called the half periods of P. Okay. Let E1 be P half, E2. So remember, P prime at half tau by 2 and 1 plus tau by 2 is 0. So I take the value of P at half tau by 2 and 1 plus tau by 2. Call these numbers E1, E2, and E3. Now Pz minus E1 has a 0 at z equal to half. Okay. That's what I'm saying. E1 is P of 1/2. So this has a 0 at z equal to half. What is the multiplicity of the 0? But what I know is P prime at half is 0. That is how that half, that is why I've chosen that half. P prime of half is 0. Therefore, Pz minus E1 has a 0 of order 2. Okay? At z equal to half. But the number of zeros in any fundamental domain can only equal to the, is exactly equal to the order. The order is 2. Therefore, Pz minus E1 has exactly 2 zeros at z equal, exactly 2 zeros in the fundamental domain. And I know that half is a double zero of Pz minus E1. Therefore, half is the only zero of Pz minus E1. Okay. Similarly, tau by 2 is a 0 of order 2 of Pz minus E2. 1 plus tau by 2 is a 0 of order 2 of Pz minus E3. There are no other zeros of Pz minus E2. Pz minus E3 has no other zeros. They have no other zeros. Pz minus E2 has no other zeros. Pz minus E3 has no other zeros. Pz minus E1 has no other zeros. What is the theorem? Theorem is that P prime squared is equal to 4 into P minus E1 into P minus E2 into P minus E3. That is, P prime squared is a cubic polynomial in P. Right? So you call the right-hand side, you call something. Let Fz be Pz minus E1, Pz minus E2, Pz minus E3. This is a meromorphic function. Okay. The order of the meromorphic function, Pz has order 2, Pz minus E1 has order 2, Pz minus E2 has order 2, Pz minus E3 has order 3. So Fz is an elliptic function of order 6, which has double zeros at 1/2 tau by 2 and 1 plus tau by 2 in the fundamental domain P0. And it has poles of order 6 at each lattice point, because Pz minus E1 has a pole of order 2 at the lattice point. Pz minus E2 has a pole of order 2 at the lattice point. Pz minus E3 has a pole of order 2 at the lattice point. So Fz has a pole of order 6 at each lattice point. Look at P prime squared. So I said this is an elliptic function. P prime is an elliptic function of order 3. Therefore, P prime squared is an elliptic function of order 6. And it has poles of order 6 at each lattice points and zeros. See, P prime has a 0 of order 1 at half. It has a 0 of order 1 at tau by 2. P prime has a 0 of order 1 at 1 plus tau by 2. Therefore, P prime squared has zeros of order 2 at 1/2 tau by 2 and 1 plus tau by 2. Okay, and therefore Fz over P prime Z is holomorphic and entire and doubly periodic and therefore constant. Okay, what is that constant? You just evaluate it at 0. So what happens at 0? Pz is 1 over z squared, P prime Z is minus 2 over z cubed plus higher order terms near 0, and therefore Fz, the constant, is minus 2 squared. P prime Z squared becomes a 4. Here you get a 1, so I must multiply it by minus 2 squared. Okay, so this elliptic function satisfies this. P prime squared is a cubic polynomial. And I hope those of you who are doing something with number theory or elliptic functions, okay, recognize that this is one of the starting points of this important area in number theory. Okay. So there's a similar way one can show that every elliptic function with periods 1 and tau. So you see, I have given you one elliptic function with period 1 and tau. Okay. And what is quite remarkable, but actually it follows very easily, I hope you will read this up, is that every elliptic function with period 1 and tau is a rational function of P and P prime. So everything else comes from P and P prime. Okay. So that's actually not difficult to see. And the idea is the same. Okay, you look at zeros and poles, etc., etc. Okay. So please have a look at this. This tells you that in some sense, the most important elliptic function is the Weierstrass elliptic function. Okay, every other elliptic function is a rational function of P and P prime. There's some rational expression in P and P prime divided by a rational expression in P and P prime. Okay, so now up to now, what was I doing? I was keeping 1 and tau fixed, where tau is something in the upper half plane. Okay, imaginary part of tau is greater than 0. If imaginary part of tau is greater than 0, then imaginary part of tau plus 1 is also greater than 0, and imaginary part of minus 1 by tau is greater than 0. Tau is equal to s plus it, 1 over tau is equal to something in the denominator, and s minus it. And then that minus minus becomes a plus, and therefore the imaginary part of 1 plus 1 over tau minus 1 over tau is greater than 0. So if you look at these two maps from the upper half plane, you see now I'm changing the point of view that I have here. Previously, I was keeping tau and 1 fixed and thinking of these elliptic functions as functions of z. Now I want to understand what is the role that tau is playing. So I want to change the tau. Okay. So the first thing you understand is that if imaginary part of tau is greater than 0, then imaginary part of tau plus 1 is greater than 0, and imaginary part of minus 1 by tau is greater than 0. Okay. Tau going to tau plus 1 and tau going to minus 1 by tau are automorphisms of the upper half plane. Okay. They will generate some subgroup of this group of automorphisms of the upper half plane. We know what the automorphisms of the upper half plane are. Okay. So I'm taking this subgroup generated by two elements. This subgroup is called the modular group. The subgroup of the automorphisms which are generated by the phi and the psi. Question is, how is the Weierstrass P function? How does the Weierstrass P function behave under these automorphisms of the upper half plane? Automorphism is acting on tau. Okay. Pz is this. So Pz depends on tau because your lattice depends on tau. Okay. So actually, when you want to think of it as functions of tau, I should tell you that Pz depends on tau. So I should denote it by P tau of z or Pz tau. Okay. The question is, how does P tau of z, Pz tau depend on tau? And the exercise you should be able to do is that Pz tau plus 1 is Pz tau. P does not change under the first element in that group of automorphisms, subgroup of automorphism, the modular group. So P does not change under the modular group, under this translation subgroup of the modular group. Whereas if you take the other generator, tau going to minus 1 by tau, the exercise is Pz is P of tau z tau with a certain multiplier in front. Please do these exercises. It's quite easy to see this. Okay. And as you can see, and those of you, I hope some of you are doing your PhDs in some related areas of elliptic functions, and you will understand that these are the kind of things that you have to worry about. Okay, so there's one more thing here about elliptic functions given in the book, which I'm not doing, but please read this up. But I want to talk about, I have 5 minutes remaining. And again, I'm sort of going to talk about something that people spend lifetimes studying. Let Ek of tau, okay, be that particular sum, 1 over n plus m tau to the power k, where k is an integer. And you want it to converge. So I want an integer which is greater than or equal to 3. Okay, tau is in the upper half plane, tau is greater than 0. This is called the Eisenstein series of order k. At least you must have heard this name before. And you've heard the name Eisenstein before in any case, but you may have heard of the name of the Eisenstein series. Okay, this converges. It's holomorphic in the upper half plane. If k is odd, then Ek of tau is equal to 0. And when you replace tau by tau plus 1, you get the same thing. And when you replace tau by minus 1 by tau, you get tau to the k times Ek tau. Okay. So this is immediate. If k is odd, then this to the k, and you get a term where you get, look at the term which says minus n minus m. Okay, so minus m to the k. Okay, and you can pull out that minus 1 out, and k is odd, so there's a minus sign. So when you sum up over everything, you get 0. So for k odd, Ek tau is 0. And this is what happens when you replace n by n plus m. Okay, so these things are very easy. How is this related to pk of z? And what is the expansion near 0 of Ek of z? Okay. So this actually, I'm not telling you what the proof is, but the point is you can expand Pz out near 0. Okay. I haven't told you what E4 and E2k plus 1 are. And using this, look at P prime squared, and P cubed, you will finally get a relation of this kind. And again, this relation, these numbers, 4, 60, and 140, these numbers turn out to be important. Okay. So this again is a crash course on elliptic functions. And of course, there's much more to understand in all these things. But as you can see, the basic ideas that we are using are only this business of residue calculus. Okay. So using residue calculus, we are doing various things about equating this and equating that, and therefore something is true. Okay, it's nearly time. Any questions? As usual, there are no questions at all. difficulties? I shouldn't say questions. Are there difficulties in what I'm doing? No? So next time, I will talk about something which is not periodic, but which is what is called quasi-periodic. Okay? Functions. So in particular, I'll talk about theta functions. So next 2 lectures, I want to tell you something about theta functions and theta function identities. Okay? And in theta functions also, I have introduced theta functions already in a particular manner. Okay? And we needed the theta functions that I'd introduced there, and then the Poisson summation formula to tell you something about this identity for functional identity for the zeta function. Okay, all these ideas are very intimately related to each other and to lots of other things. So next time there are only 2 lectures remaining. So we'll talk about theta functions and various things about theta functions. So one more thing I want you to do is we are getting close to the end of the course. Saturday, everything stops, which will be quite a relief for both the audience and the speakers. Okay. But I want you to write down a 2-page, all of you, and please do this. Write down a 2-page evaluation of this course and send it to me. Okay. I don't think that's too much to ask for. I have already written out 111 pages. By the time we finish, it'll probably be 125 pages. Okay. So I have written out 125 pages. I want each of you to write down 2 pages about this course, about the notes, about the lectures, about content. Okay. How much did you understand? How much did you not understand? Were you able to at least see that there are things which are related to very large parts of mathematics? And have there been ways in which you're beginning to see things in a slightly different way than what you had done before? So please think about this. I want you to write this out. Okay. And definitely send it to me. Hopefully you'll send it to me before Thursday. We'll meet on Thursday at 4:45, but I definitely want, so please send it to me before Thursday. Then maybe on Saturday, I'll talk about it in the last lecture. Okay, so I want a write-up of 2 pages about this course from each of you. So I should get 32 responses from all of you. Okay. Okay, I should stop. Any questions? No questions?
Sir, write up handwritten or?
Handwritten, it's okay. And it should be about the course, what you thought about it, what were the lectures going on, did you see something new, did you know all of it already? Was it much too fast? Of course it is much too fast. Okay, of course I'm trying to do too much. But I have written everything out. Everything has been written out. So if you just read it a couple of times, and as I say over and over again, it's not just reading. You must write it out in your own hand. And by writing it out in your own hand a couple of times, you will understand what is going on. I'm repeating myself, reading things does not help you understand. Writing things out, even if you're copying from a book or copying from the notes, writing things out in your own hand forces you to understand. Okay, so please write this whole thing out once. You will understand what is going on. So I want to write up by Thursday before the lecture, okay, about everything. Okay, Any questions? No questions? People want to say anything? No. So I'll stop now. I'll stop sharing. I'll switch off the camera and my mic.